Assalamu alaikum. So welcome to Ihsan Cast Season 2 Episode 2, and today I've got a really special guest actually. I've travelled to Birmingham to meet Shaykh Sjaad Hussain. Shaykh Sjaad has been teaching the Islamic sciences for over 10 years. He's the co-founder of the Sacred Text Syllabus, which runs in both Birmingham and in East London. And also New Roots and Open
Yeah,
Circle.
yeah, new roots as well.
So, Sheikh Sajjad's, alhamdulillah, got a lot of knowledge, but also the reason why I asked for himself for today was the fact that he's actually got a lot of experience in this field that we're going to be discussing, due to the fact that he's been teaching for, over a decade. So I was just going to give a brief introduction to what we were going to talk about today, and that was, has religion become irrelevant? And the reason why I asked this is because I'm not looking at it from the perspective of, someone being convinced to not believe in Islam and not become or not remain in the fold of Islam through new atheism, or through, reading Sam Harris's book The Moral Landscape and thinking, wow, this is incredible and this has opened my eyes and I'm going to ditch this religion and now become an atheist. From what I saw is that it's something a lot more simpler than even that. Is people are just saying that the faith is not relevant at all to their lives, and I'll give you an example. Is that I remember the first week that I was at work, and I asked one of the guys who was sitting next to me. He had a Muslim name, so I thought, well, I need to pray Jummah. So what I'll do is I'll ask him, you know, where's the nearest place that we pray Jummah? Do we pray Jummah in work, or is there a masjid that we go to? And he said to me, because I don't know, I don't pray. And I thought, okay, like fine. And then he said, well, I don't pray because I don't believe. And I said, okay. And I said, oh, well, why don't you, if you don't mind me asking, why don't you believe? And he said, because I just don't find it relevant. What is Islam going to do for me at this point in my life? And to me, that was obviously a shock, because in religious circles, we always think people turn away from the faith because, atheism, New Age atheism has taken them away. But this was something completely different to me. And what I found was that the majority of people were actually like that, where the reason why they didn't pray, the reason why they were no longer a Muslim, was because of the fact that they didn't find that religion was doing anything for them or was relevant in their lives. And quote unquote, he said, I would rather focus on more important issues for myself, which is, earning a good income, getting a wage increase, being able to get save up to get a deposit on a house. These are more important and relevant issues for me than whether I believe or whether I don't believe. So I just wanted your take on that. Is just that, as a teacher of the Islamic sciences, have you found that to be an issue, first of all?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, I mean, it's this the question is too big to kind of tackle it from kind of every angle and multiple angles. Firstly, I think personally that we're currently living in, I think ulama have mentioned it, we're living post-religion now, I think. Post-religion would mean that religion is no longer at the center of, or a form of religion, it doesn't have to be Abrahamic faith, at the center of the majority of, if you took over 7 billion people in the world, that religion plays a central part in people's lives. For the masses anyway, for the majority of people in the world. So we're living post-religion. In the West, we're definitely post-religion. In the West, it just has to be post-Christianity for it to be post-religion. I remember I read a quote, I don't know if it was in Sherry Turkle's book or somewhere else. Somebody said that she interviewed, I think it was Sherry Turkle, she was interviewing different teenagers about social media and how they use it. It was either her or somebody else, and one of these teenagers said, why do I need God when I have an iPhone? Interesting. But if you analyze that statement and think about a teenager's life in the UK now, Muslim or non-Muslim, doesn't make a difference. A 14-year-old going through school now, what do they generally spend their time in? They'll spend most of their time, 8 hours in school a day, but most of their mental time, I'm talking about, is engaged with the virtual world. So they'll be talking to their friends on, on WhatsApp or via Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or whatever it may be. At least 7 hours of their day, on average 5 to 7 hours, is taken up with that. Now, what else do they need aside from an iPhone to do that?
Yeah.
And the fact that they're so engaged, these kind of great existential kind of questions and these metaphysical questions, I think Shaykh Fazl Rahman Ansari, in his kind of masterpiece on book, 2-volume book on Quranic foundations, talks about how he says human beings always ask the why question. It's just kind of natural within the human being to ask the why question for everything. And at some point, the human being will ask the greater why question. Why am I here? But if you've got preventive measures, impediments to that question, it's very, very difficult for you to gauge that question. Neil Postman said in his introduction to Amusing Ourselves, what was his book called? Amusing Ourselves to Death. Yeah. He said that when he talks about the Huxleyan and Orwellian model of what the future may look like, he writes, this is not to quote him verbatim, but he writes that Huxley believed that we would be so kind of overwhelmed, or we'll be drowning in so much information that the truth will become irrelevant, because it's not about if it's true or false. It's just access to all the masses of information we have. You never can find out anyway. So when we live in an information age where, and I just want to kind of pitch where we're at, that's the point, scope the problem or survey the problem. We're currently in a period unlike any in history. Bear in mind that pre-industrial age, the whole idea of Luddites comes from this guy named Ned Ludd, I think his name was. And he went around in the 1800s, early 1800s, because I think he worked in he worked in the cotton industry. Well, it was an industry then, and when these machines came out, he went around breaking all these machines. So anybody who's anti-tech or anti-machinery was known as a Luddite after that. That's the rumor anyway. But prior to that, technological advancements were quite slow, every 100, 200 years. But if you look post 2000, the Nokia 702, you remember it? You remember Nokia 702, you're probably too young then. But that was a kind of a common phone in 98, 99. To go from a phone where you're saying, wow, we put this chip in, you get credits, you can contact other people, you get 10 text messages a day. Within 6 years, to taking pictures on your phone, to 8 years, you have internet running, from dial-up to that.
Yep.
To another 8 or 9 years where, a village in Pakistan where your parents visit every year, which has 8 houses and 3 cows, where you're live talking to them on WhatsApp, and you can see the cow and you can see whatever else, to AI, which is now, is the most money in the world is being invested in that, to augmented reality as well, AR devices that have been worked on by the biggest businesses. What's next? It's almost as if, Elon Musk said it in an interview. He said that we're reaching a level where the virtual world is becoming human-like, where it's very difficult to differentiate. It's going to be very difficult to differentiate between the real world and the virtual world. And then he said something quite interesting, which has been taken by all the conspiracy theorists as, he said, what if we are the virtual world? So I think technological advancement has a huge role to play in it. I won't say it's a central problem. There are other problems as well to bring in, but I think that is one huge problem that we cannot tackle. I don't think it's not solvable, personally. And considering I'm not saying that, I'm not being dystopian about it, saying there's no answer to it. But we have to accept that we kind of are post-religion now. We're not going to have this. But in my personal opinion, we're not going to have this kind of this tajdeed, like in the sense of this huge worldwide spiritual revival. I don't think that's the case, because if you look at the hadith literature, we're kind of counting down anyway. So I accept that idea. We are counting down. We're not like, oh, there's a revival and then, then it'll go down to another revival and peaks and troughs. I believe we're counting down now. So, and we're heading towards the end, and this is the natural course that the world will generally take. That's kind of to survey the problem. We can talk about the solutions and stuff separately.
So I just wanted to talk about, you mentioned it briefly regarding people's upbringing and their introduction to the faith, because like I said, is when it comes to relevance, if you've been brought up in a household or an atmosphere, or you've been taught by scholars or people that your parents listened to, or people that your parents sent you to the masjid to go and learn from, the things that they teach are not relevant to you. Do you think that is a case as well? Is that's a central driver as to why people, when they then grow up, don't have that attachment of, well, I need my faith.
Yeah.
In terms of, well, instead of I need my faith, rather than saying, well, I don't need my faith because I can substitute it with this augmented reality that is now going to take place, or that's now being heavily invested into, and that's now going to be the future.
Yeah, I think, look, firstly we have to define what faith is. What does faith mean to people? And there is a disconnect between, if you take people who have problems with their faith later on in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at their childhood. I haven't surveyed this, but from my experience with people, which is to a degree anecdotal, but I've met thousands of people probably that I've managed to at least observe or talk about their early life. There's definitely a connection or relationship between what happened when they were young and how they see faith when they're older. And there are different elements of that. So take, as an example, which is quite interesting, take teenagers who are quite disconnected from the faith. They may have grown up in a predominantly irreligious family, in the sense that it wasn't a practicing family. Go and look at the cases of teenagers, especially in their late teens, joining extremist groups. What you find often is that they don't have much of an early relationship with Islam.
Mm-hmm.
They're teenagers, so they're going through all of that. Many of them suffered bullying at school. And this new kind of thing, this shiny thing now, gives them confidence. It puts them in a place where they're accepted. So we have that kind of element as well, where for some people, bad experiences as a child, when they're introduced to absence of Islam entirely, and they experience it later, sometimes it does that is the place that they were looking for. So everybody has a different experience. That's my point. But what I'll definitely say is, when you're young, if your experiences with religion are of a particular type, for instance, you grow up and your parents force prayer on you. So your relationship with God, what is it? Your relationship with God is, there is a God, okay, fair enough, I can get that part. But God to me is the one who forced me to pray, because God to them is not God. God to them is presented through the words of your parents or the actions of your parents. So for them, they can't differentiate between parents telling me to do something as a command and God obligating something. For them, it's all parents, because that's the kind of vehicle or the medium that it's coming through. And I've said this before as well, that if they have a bad relationship with their parents already, they don't get on with their parents, or there's some kind of, they're adverse to parents, commands from parents, or there's some issues going on at home, and parents tell them to go and pray now, and they generally are fed up or they've got a problem with their parents, they're going to translate that in the same way. Okay. So their interpretation of religion now, or praying, is not, this is obligatory upon me, or the beauties of prayer, or whatever you may have it. It's dad's telling me to do it, and they won't pray because of that. Or they'll have a bad understanding of it because they had a bad relationship with their parents. So often we see Islam through the lens of our parents, or not through the lens of our parents, but through our lens, looking at our parents, not looking at the religion. So, and I'll give you an example of that. Recently, somebody was telling me that so one of their children is as it doesn't like praying and things like that, and is having some doubts or whatever. And it was because the parents, when they were younger, would punish them if they didn't pray. Now just think about that for a second. So what's the relationship with prayer now for them? If I pray, my parents will get off my back. If I don't pray, my parents are going to punish me. You get to an age where you don't have to accept what your parents are saying, because I'm old enough now, I can talk back and I don't need to accept that. So there's no foundational relationship with God at all anymore. So childhood has a huge part to play. Go to the madrasa, same thing. The madrasa is telling you, you've got to do this. And it's transactional. You do this, you get this, you do this. And sometimes that works for little children. 6, 7-year-olds, it can be transactional. But children ask great philosophical questions. My son was asking me philosophical questions at the age of 7 and 8. How do we know God exists? How do we know aliens didn't create the world? All of these things he was asking me. Which are honest questions where we dealt with them, we sat with them, talked about them. So, and I let him ask those questions. I didn't say, oh, they're stupid questions. Muslims don't believe that. You shouldn't say that as a Muslim. So childhood has a huge part to play in it. That's one element. Childhood, definitely. So your relationship with, you said about the ulama. Children don't care who the ulama are. Children don't know what ulama are. For children, it's just, I remember this interesting story of, there's this particular scholar, and he was a scholar who went around the world giving dawah, and so there are these two people and university students talking, and one university student says to the other that, oh, that scholar, he was a deviant, he was a heretic or whatever, university talk, usual stuff. And this guy was really upset, and he said, no, it wasn't like that, stop saying that. He said, but he said this, and all this proof. And that guy just wouldn't have it. He said, no, he was a great man. What you find out later is that that scholar would visit the area that this guy lived in. And his memory of that scholar as a child was that that scholar would come to his house, would give him sweets. So he had a loving relationship with that scholar. So that's the only way he knew him. Now that's not to say he said anything heretical, I'm not saying that. My point was, his relationship wasn't with him as a scholar, it was a personal relationship. That this was an old man that would come to my house that I remember. Mm-hmm. And maybe some of the religion was kind of that he had a inclination towards a religion because he saw him as he was a religious person as well. So childhood has a major part to play in it, 100%, but it's not the only factor though. Because childhood plays a part to a particular period and then other factors enter. So childhood definitely, I would say. So I do believe as parents, we have failed to a degree, definitely. I'm sure there are great parents out there as well. But parents do often use religion to justify, to use it as a control mechanism. And I think that's failing your children. We should never use God as a control mechanism to control our kids. If they're not listening to us, what we'll do now is we'll just use God. I remember, Babur, the Mughal emperor, whatever you want to call him, leader. There was an interesting story. Dalrymple mentions that he wasn't a religious guy. But when they were fighting against Hindus at a particular time, he told all the Muslim soldiers, this is jihad. Because that's the only way he can get them going. So people have always used God to kind of promote their agenda. And parents shouldn't do that because the ramifications, the consequences of that are huge. And it will affect the child later. And we need a much different, we need to look at our approach in the madrasas, in schools, in our parenting, in what we're teaching children about the religion and what their first introduction or relationship with that with religion is. So I think that's important. Yeah.
Okay. So, that's really interesting in terms of childhood and setting those early ideas about God in a correct manner, and not using God as a tool for your own gain so that your child becomes obedient to you, rather, in order for your child to be obedient to God is completely different.
Yeah, the thing is, look, obedience. See that word? It's a loaded term. You see, this idea. You know, you hear it a lot. The wife must be obedient to the husband. Mola Jat. So see this word obedience. We have to unpack what that word means, because what does it mean? What do we mean when we say, "Oh, we must be obedient to God"? What does that actually? What does that entail?
Mm-hmm.
For children, see, obedience is kind of a obedience is not a loving term. Well, generally when people use it, you have to obey. It's a very, very loaded term, you see. So we have to unpack that term, or stop using it. Actually, you know, when a husband says to his wife, "You must obey me," or what does that entail? What does that infer? It infers a kind of a very draconian, particular power dynamic.
And almost going against your will as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that's you're compelled to do particular things, or acquiesced at the very least. So the thing is, when we say to children, you must obey God. No, but let's be honest. Firstly, God is unseen, so nobody's met God or seen God. So God is an idea to most, especially children. For us, it's that idea is settled in and it's belief. For children, you're teaching them, oh, there's a God that created the world. So they can't communicate with God. They can't verify your statement. So the only thing you can do is teach them through. I generally have the principle of shukr. I think shukr is the best way to introduce God to children. That if shukr, but do it that way, or do we say, oh, do you know, as Muslims we must do this, we can't do this. That's not a very good way to build a relationship. The relationship must be built up first before. You don't tell a 4-year-old you must obey God. Otherwise, rather you say, oh, God created us, God is, and then you introduce God in different ways as the creator. You know that some of the theology books, the first point of call that they have is this idea of wujud al-sani' or ithbat al-sani', the existence of God, and not God of a creator. A very interesting way to introduce God. But what we tend to do is God's already there in the discussion, and it's just, well, God said you can't do that. From the absolutely haram things, we'll mention all of them and add whatever other harams to that. God said you can't do that. God said is there any positive discussion there? I mean,
well, don't mention the hellfire at like 2 or 3.
This is another huge mistake. Yeah, I mean, hell shouldn't even be a discussion for children. Although there has to be some negative elements as well that you teach as prevention. Definitely 100%. I get that part. I do get that part. But hellfire shouldn't be a discussion at that point, because what does that entail? What are the ramifications? You know, if a child watches a horror movie, they can be affected for many years after. When I was little, I mean, the horror movies that I watched as a child, I remember how scared I was at that time. So it's very difficult to get that. I don't watch
PTSD?
Probably. But, you know, I don't principally watch horror movies now.
Okay.
And because I remember some of the earlier ones, The Walking Dead or whatever it was called, Living Dead or whatever. And that really affected me. So imagine telling them if, you know, you don't do this, you're going to eat from the tree of Zaqqum, and, you know, your intestines. You see my point?
Yeah.
Some people do that. It's not a good way of educating, it's not a good way of introducing God. That's my point, yeah. So obedience has to be...
Yeah.
I don't think that's the term that we need to employ.
Okay. So, moving on from childhood now, you know, I'm kind of getting into teenage and adult university time. So, just going back to that example that I mentioned at the start of that person saying to me, God isn't relevant to me, for instance, and I'd rather focus on these other worldly things. Some people will say that it's because of the fact that the discussions that, say for instance at university, someone might be at an ISOC at university taking an interest in Islam, okay, taking interest in their religion, they attend a few of the talks or whatever, and they find out that none of the things that are being discussed or talked about are even remotely relevant to what's happening in their lives. and therefore in their mind they think, do I really need this faith?
Yeah.
So almost my question to yourself, someone who's been teaching the Islamic sciences for over a decade now, is the relevance of teaching and the relevance of what you teach. How important is that in terms of, I'm not necessarily going to say keeping people interested in the faith, because I think that's a very hollow faith to have, but in terms of making the religious discourse relevant to people,
Yeah.
do you think that's being done first of all, and then we'll kind of move on.
Look, age is quite important. I remember in 2014, I was teaching I had a particular class. I just started it. It was once a month, and that's around about when we set up New Roots, which is our community organisation. It was set up a little while before that, and my wife said to me that, do you think that this is the most important thing we need right now? So I was teaching a lot anyway, and at that point I cancelled that class because I felt, actually, let's survey the issue. And we set up in a little while after that, we set up New Roots at that time, but a little while after that we set up Open Circle, which is aimed at teenagers, secondary school. And we felt that at that time there was nothing available. Firstly, we felt that young people, especially teenagers between the ages of 12 maybe and 16, maybe 19, but 16 definitely, it's the time that they mostly leave masjid, so they don't, or madrasa, they don't have, they stop reading Quran almost entirely, unless they have religious families and their parents force them to read it. They also at that time are really focused on school, so their parents from the age of 13 probably onwards are prepping them for, they have extra tutoring, so there again there's not religious and there's not connection to the religion, and also there's nowhere for them to go. They're kind of too old for madrasa, they're too young for other courses that are available. Mainly they attract 18 plus. There was this huge gap. They're going through puberty, which is a huge problem for them at that time. All sorts of other social dynamics at school they're going through. Their bodies are going through transformation. They're mentally going through transformation. They have pretty much zero access to religion. And we know that religion can offer them a lot. Mm-hmm. There's a lot there that can help them through that period. So what are their memories as teenagers, early teens? And I based it on my own. I mean, I only started practicing really around 17, 18 maybe. Before that, in those years, I knew very, very little about religion, or I had very little interest. So we set up this youth group, and the whole point of it was create a safe space and not teach them religion as such, but make it organic, natural, have different ideas going on there. So we have a subject called Conversations, where we talk about things that affect them in life. They're not religious at all. But then try to put religion, we do have faith and practice in that, which is more inspirational. Mm-hmm. More than anything, it's inspirational. Our whole objective was that when they leave us at 15 or 16 or 16, that their relationship with religion, they'll have memories of that relationship with religion. So we taught them things that resonate with them and resonated with them at that particular time. So when they grow up, they'll have those memories. Oh, fond memories of religion. I learned this and we did this together, and that worked really well. I mean, it's now at the moment, Open Circle is huge, and it's one of the biggest youth groups in the West Midlands anyway. And we have a very particular philosophy for it as well. And so my point is, at that age, that's the relation. We have to build a different relationship for each age group. Mm-hmm. Now imagine if that relationship's not there, and you go to college now for 2 years between 16 and 18. That's when you're introduced to ISOCs and things like that. I think in college first, I think most colleges have ISOCs. Now, either kids are going through a lot. If imagine them into all boys school, now they go to college, which is mixed. There's other issues now that they're going to face. for seeing girls for the first time and girls seeing boys. It doesn't matter what kind of religious conservatism they come from. It doesn't make any difference. Once you're in that, that's a new challenge now. So they're going through all that. What is there then out there for them? So either you're going to be, the ISAF could provide something.
Yeah.
You'll meet some people that are a bit religious, but remember, even those people that are a bit religious are still going through a journey. You've seen people who are 17, 18, very religious, come 26, completely gone, come 35, back into religion. They're still going through a journey. We as people who are probably older, that have experienced that, we need to build these safe spaces that are relevant. That's the word that you use is important, that's relevant, that fits into their narrative and into how they're living their life. You can't tell a child, you can't say to a teenager that's 17 or 18, stop using your phone. That isn't going to happen. It's not going to, you can't do that. So somehow you have to incorporate that you have to incorporate spirituality into that. If you look at the 60s and 70s, in America, there was a huge rise in this kind of Hindu spirituality, or philosophical Hinduism. Now you have it with Sadhguru, and you had it at that time with Osho and these other people. You had it with the Beatles as well. All looking for gurus and spiritual enlightenment. It's always been there.
Mm-hmm.
They managed to really sell it well. They marketed it brilliantly, but there was a crisis going on. So when we're talking about relevance, bear something else in mind. You may say religion is not relevant as it's been presented. I definitely accept that. But there's also a huge spiritual crisis going on. And the only answer to that person is religion for me. It's religion. Religion is, if we now reintroduce them to religion through that kind of need or requirement, it would be incredible, especially in the West now. The West is crying out for spirituality. And they're looking in every little corner wherever they can find it, if that's in Sadhguru or a guru or wherever it may be, in something spiritual. Take Russell Brand. Look at Russell Brand's a perfect example of that. Multi-millionaires that have just empty lives, realizing materialism hasn't given them anything. So that's why I said earlier that although we're counting down, there's a lot of work to do. But we need to kind of package. I wouldn't say repackage, but reintroduce religion to all of these people in a very, very particular way, and it has to be different for each age group. And personally, that's what I've experienced. So we have a lot of responsibility, is my point, answer to the question, to do that.
And might be a little bit controversial, but in terms of the scholarship being relevant, and something maybe you can kind of add to it. So, for instance, scholars will advocate fatwas that have been imported from Pakistan or from India, or even from like Azhar in Egypt as well, in terms of that. And then someone looks at it, a 19, 20-year-old, for instance, with the coronavirus right now.
Yeah.
And you've got fatwas from Pakistan, you've got fatwas from India, you've got fatwas from Egypt, and one of them saying you shouldn't close the mosque at all. Carry on as normal. This is a sign of you having a lack of faith in God, etc., etc. I mean, to a rational person living in the 21st century, as you mentioned, you've got access to information. You see that, for instance, this coronavirus issue, you see that social distancing is a preventive measure, right? And then you see a fatwa that comes out and says, that's nonsense. Everyone gather in the masjid, right? And end of story. And that's going to show your faith in God. I mean, to me, if someone is having a crisis in faith or is being slightly skeptical about their faith and sees one of these fatwas or sees a scholar that they know advocating for that kind of position, I mean, surely that's a put off.
Yeah, the thing is, you can't get away with what you could possibly get away with 100 years ago. You just can't do it anymore. You can't claim the supernatural and get away with things now, where you can't get away with I know best. Because a lot of these issues that you mentioned, take the coronavirus, is not a religious issue to begin with. It's not really, in the sense that you can't play the religion card here by saying, oh, there's no such thing as contagious in viruses. It's complete rubbish. You just need to Google it now, and you can.
Yeah.
So you can't get away with that. And we've got plenty of precedents to show the effect of viruses. And look at the Spanish flu, how many people it killed. Look at the plague, the bubonic plague. Look at all of these different kind of historical events that we had that wiped out 20 million, 30, 40 million people. So you can't get away with the same things, you see. Similarly, you can't take the moon sighting issue. You can't get away with a lot of things. The amount of information that's available to people now, and very intelligent people out there as well. These are not. You don't live in an age where, 60% of the population cannot read and write or are uneducated. We live in the West, where almost 100% of the people, can read and write.
Yeah.
Everybody can read.
It's interesting. So it's just there's a statistic about Glasgow, and that 49% of the population, of the entire population, are up to degree level educated.
There you go. So you see, so you can't get away with what you could get away with before. So scholars now have to be incredibly responsible in what they say. That what they say must be anchored in. It must be educated, and you can't play the superstitious card, or you can't play the I know better card. You just can't do that. Some issues, of course, scholars can do that in the sense of they're experts in the field. I get that we have experts in every field, but that culture where I'm a religious person, I went to madrasa for a few years and studied Dars al-Nizami, therefore I am the authority. That card is finished. You can't play that card anymore. People can debunk that very easily. And there are many people who have studied as well. Don't assume that just because you don't wear a particular form of clothing or dress, or that the person you're speaking to isn't very well educated in Islam. You find many people are very well educated, but they wouldn't seem like, if you looked at them as what you presume a scholar to look like, that they're scholars. So there's a huge problem there. Number two, scholars need to research, and whatever they say needs to be well grounded, and that's not happening, unfortunately. It's not happening. Take, for instance, Eastern fatwas. Have they analysed and surveyed the problem in the West? Maybe they haven't. Often they haven't. So things related to marriage and divorce, for instance, taking such a certain cultural paradigms, scholars coming here from a different country with completely different lifestyle, and then giving advice to married couples, or that completely eradicates or kind of puts to the side their cultural kind of dynamics, is very dangerous. Furthermore, fatwas of this nature, corona, whatever it may be, must be educated. If you're gonna, I'll give an example. If take a particular form of technology, if that came out now and it was controversial, and if there were scholars that had no knowledge of that particular form of technology, then how on earth are they given a fatwa? There's a ruling there's a general understanding and axiom in the Sharia, al-hukmu ala shay'i far'un an tasawwurihi, which is that any particular ruling that you give or one gives must be anchored in understanding what you're giving a ruling about, or must be based on a deep understanding of that issue.
So that's a qawaid, a legal maxim.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of that just to throw it out there. I remember a conference about 4 years ago in India where a really famous mufti stood up and said that, I couldn't believe it. He said something like, he was talking about cryptocurrency. He said Bitcoin is haram because it sits in a central computer, and if that computer is destroyed, you've lost your Bitcoin, which is the complete opposite of what it is. The blockchains are decentralized. It's what it's trying to solve. Now, and that's what I mean. What I mean is, and if you read our history, take coffee, chess, printing presses, you find historically that the first reaction, the knee-jerk reaction, was almost always wrong. By the ulama I'm talking about. And then they just kind of reacted to it. And then later ulama came and said, wait there, hold on, let's think about this. And they're not, and those scholars, we know them now. We remember those scholars, but we don't remember the scholars who reacted immediately. I remember, Oman Pamuk has a book called My Name is Red, famous Turkish novelist. And so he has this book where it's a first person, different people throughout the book trying to work out how a particular miniaturist was murdered. So there's a scene in that book where there's a mullah in the book, and he and his students are going around, breaking coffee houses, going in and just trashing them, and he's seen as a religious mullah in that. But you've always kind of had that religious group of people, but now the difference is they're being found out. You see, where their research doesn't hold any value, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, it's not well done, has huge mistakes in it. There are great scholars out there, don't get me wrong. There's scholars who are doing great work out there. But scholars need to be very, very careful, or people, and we have to differentiate between scholars and what I call preachers. I think they're different.
Okay.
What we have a lot of is preachers. Just because you went to madrasa or an institute or a ma'had and you studied for 6 years doesn't make you a scholar. Okay? Mm-hmm. It doesn't make you a scholar at all. It makes you a student of knowledge, yes, and we hope that we're all students of knowledge. But it most likely makes you a preacher. If you give a khutbah on Jumu'ah, or you give public talks, that makes you a preacher. It doesn't make you a scholar. While verse scholars, al-muhakkikun, are quite rare actually. You have a lot of students of knowledge, and once we accept that we have the majority we have is students of knowledge, we have preachers, and we have some scholars, and not everybody's a scholar, not everybody's authority. The quicker we make that distinction, the better, I think. And preachers are not to be taken seriously in these matters anyway. Just because a preacher says something on the internet, of a particular fatwa, if he does give a fatwa, we have to go and verify if he is actually a scholar, and if we accept him as that, or is he just a student of knowledge who's given an opinion. So
yeah, that's a good point. Okay, on in the next point, which I want to tie in with that, is the idea of modernity and how that impacts religious relevance. But one of the things that I actually did want to kind of pick up on is it's related to modernity, and it's actually related to the point that you've just made, is this idea of the world always changing and things that are at a very, very fast pace. And what you've mentioned is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that one of the main differences between a preacher and a scholar would be, for instance, with an issue, a preacher, if the issue comes up, the preacher will talk about it straight away at that time and release that information.
yeah, I'm just sorry, just to interject, I'll give you an example of this.
Yeah.
When there's a kind of a social event that takes place, whatever it may be, a famous fashionista removes a hijab or something like that.
Yeah.
Preachers often, you find, they're the first people to react.
Mm-hmm.
So within 24 hours, there's something up on their YouTube channel, or there's a talk going on about it. That's not what scholars do, you see. You're absolutely right. But that's an example of when we have preachers representing Sharia, which is hugely problematic. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so basically exactly that. Brilliant example. The point is that modernity is stating that everything is very, very fast-paced. Everything is changing very quickly. You need to have your finger on the pulse. And therefore, preachers would say, well, we are trying to tackle these issues as they are happening because the demand from the public is that you should be tackling these issues. Now, obviously, like I said, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but a scholar's mindset would, of course, not be that mindset. They would be looking far deeper into the issue. What are the underlying causes between that? For instance, with the hijab, what are the underlying reasons because of why that person took off the hijab? Living in the circumstance that they're living in, the contextualization of the issue, the relevance of the issue. Is it even worth taking my time out to deal with such an issue? Etc., etc. Obviously, that's going to take a lot of time to build up a case and to build up a kind of to build up a case and to build up an argument, and then release that to the public. Do you think that almost my questions, you more or less answered it, but maybe you can kind of flesh it out a bit more, is that, do you think that is a circumstance of the modernity and kind of liquid modernity mindset that we have, where everything is changing, so everything has to be fast. You have to push out content fast.
Yeah, I mean, one element is that, I mean, if you're an influencer, look at the word that we use now for these people often is influencers. People who influence other people. I mean, YouTubers, people on Instagram. So we see the public now have a medium where anybody can pick up a mic and a camera and be a voice. This is unprecedented. We don't have any reference to such kind of ease to public access in history. The most you can do is go out in public and, you know, put a box there and stand on it, and you'll be chased out of the village or the marketplace. But we've never had that before.
And also, just on that point, is no one would take that person seriously. They would look at, you know, this is a madman ringing a bell. You know, like, you know, it's a madman ringing the bell. No one take him seriously. Whereas what's happening now is these influencers their words are being taken very seriously.
Well, there's a few reasons for that. One of the reasons is, of course, they resonate with younger people. So they're talking about the right things, or they're doing, or the teenagers, or even, you know, the people in their late teens. He's one of us, or she's one of us. They've been through the same challenges and experiences, so a lot resonates with them, and there's a greater connection. Whereas if you're a 46-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old bearded man with a turban sitting there, what real kind of relationship are you going to have? Not that that's wrong. I'm just saying, kind of surveying the issue. With a 14-year-old that plays Fortnite and listens to Digdat, I mean, you're not really going to have, like, that relationship isn't there. So they're going to be like, oh, he just looks like my granddad. And I had bad experience with my granddad, whatever it may be. So modernity, definitely, as it is, and the thing is, the liquid element of it is that it's moving at a really fast pace, where, you know, when somebody tells you that Facebook is irrelevant, like it's an old man that's so 90s. Early 2000, Facebook probably was around 2001, 2.
Yeah, early 2000s.
Early 2000s. Like, oh, that's what my dad uses. Now, when Facebook is becoming outdated, and somebody told me the other day that even, you know, Snapchat is irrelevant now. It's all about Insta. Insta's on its way out, and now they're moving into other mediums.
TikTok, I think.
Yeah, TikTok's pretty big now, and Twitch and all these others. You know, although that's more of a gaming interface, but it's hugely changing, and we take it from the religious, because we're anchoring everything in religion, and where religion is important. Are we thinking about where we're going to be at in 10 years' time? I mean, there's this idea now, by the way. There was something written about Amazon, that within 20, 30 years' time, Amazon's AI, its AI system, will be able to predict everything you need and send it to you without you purchasing it.
Wow.
Because currently I think it's like 5% accurate in the sense of being able to predict what you will need or require. Imagine if they got it to, even if it's much more than that, but imagine they got it over 90%.
With big data's pushing.
Exactly. Now, with all that data, they would know exactly what you need and when you need it. So it's hugely changing, the whole system's changing. But the question is, us as people that kind of work in this field and live in this field of religion and how religion is relevant in people's lives, we've got a lot of work to do to work out where we'll be at pitch in 10 months. I remember talking to a scholar mentioning something, and he said, forget about that. You need to be worried about what's going to happen in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. You know, I remember about 10 years ago, the fastest internet we had here, 2010, was 4 gigabyte. Remember, 448?
408, I think.
408, yeah. Now nobody can live without 100. But yeah, I remember around 2010, they were saying, Taiwan has 100 meg. It was 4 meg. 100 meg. It was 100 meg. How do they have 100 meg? They're probably running on gigabytes now. I mean, but that's how fast we're moving. Sooner or later, things like buffering and browser speeds are going to be irrelevant. Information will be instantly accessible, probably through an AR system, some augmented reality system, like a Minority Report, where you're just moving stuff around. It's gonna be there. How do we deal? And that would mean that we're plugged in not 4 or 5 hours a day, 24 hours a day. You know, Sherry Turkle talks about this idea of how many kids wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety, of FOMO, fear of missing out, quickly checking their phones if they've missed a message or something's gone on and they've missed it. So now their whole sleeping pattern's disrupted because of that. Now this is unprecedented. The only place that we found this in prior was in stock markets, and that's why they had closing times for stock markets, and that's why you have trading starts at 9:30 in Eastern time, because otherwise if it were 24 hours it would have been when the market wakes up. But you only really found it in those people, because it hasn't gone up, has it gone down, what's happened, world events affecting.
The irony is that even in finance that was seen as a bad thing, FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
It's calculated as a cognitive bias,
Yeah.
which actually hinders your ability to make good financial decisions.
100%. Like if you FOMO into it, you catch a knife or whatever it may be, in trading you're finished. Now the thing is that's the kind of era we're living in, and are we currently updating our way and our approach? We remember off camera we were talking about how creative are we, or how much attention are we given to creativity. Here creativity is seen as something even now negative. I mean, how many creative Muslims, or what's the space for creative Muslims to function in? Well, what take just as a simple example, I remember Sheikh Didu was a great Mauritanian scholar, and they asked him about the Musalsal Umar, which is the Umar series. And when it came out, the Umar series, and I haven't really watched it, but there was a whole controversy. They're depicting a Sahabi, but other people are raving about it. It's brilliant, it's amazing. The same thing happened with The Message when I was a kid, I remember. So they asked him, and he said it's fine. And they said, why? The questioner says, and he says, well, look, he said, you have to bear in mind that these types of programs now and movies are now the modern Siyar Alam Nubala. Siyar Alam Nubala was a great book written by Dhahabi, where he documents these biographies of all these great people. And he says this is how people interact with biographies now. They in film, in motion picture. And he said this is the way. And if you really think about that, look how Ertuğrul, the whole series keeps
just
off.
thinking that
It was a worldwide revolution in the sense of how we see that people who had never heard of the Ottoman Empire, who had something, not even the books of history, they don't teach that at school. Ottomans, what's that? Isn't it that sofa thing that you have in your house, or that Ottoman bed or whatever it may be, the one with the springs that you lift. But now they're all like, I want to go to Bursa. The point is, look how it introduced a whole, but we haven't been creative enough in that field. I mean, even that was really, let's be honest, as good as the narrative. It's very long, but it's too long. But the production, compare it, how many years behind are they in production? Compare Kingdom of Heaven to Ertuğrul, production quality, it's worlds apart. We're still massively behind. Take spoken word, take all that kind of field, where it's just not there. This is what is really relevant to people. Look at the effect poets have now, modern poets, in spoken word, or rappers have on people's lives. Social analysts, or take Riz Ahmed. I did a podcast on Riz Ahmed. He's a recent one. Was it Where Am I From? It's had a huge impact. Everybody's talking about it. Where's that creative space for religious people? I.e., are the scholars really taking it? But not just the scholars. Let's kind of people in religious positions, or people have organizations that. Are we using that creative space well? And I think we're miles behind, light years behind. We need to really focus, invest in that field, in that area, and begin to kind of use that medium to attract younger people, because that's what matters now, and even young adults. I think that's where it's at.
So the Qawwali sessions and the not Mehfil Sharifs are
Well, yeah. Well, just.
I mean, that was the equivalent, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is. I mean, it's interesting because you're talking about that, but it's almost as if that generation had that attachment. You know, as much as we may mock it, but they had that attachment to the faith. In the way that they were listening to these Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, etc.
But the
etc.
ghazal, remember, the ghazal is huge in India
Yeah.
in history. You know, music in India has been part and parcel of their culture,
Mm-hmm.
their fabric, for millennia. I
Yeah.
mean, you can't take that away from the people,
Yeah.
and that wasn't a kind of a way into promoting or a tool to utilize to promote religion.
Yeah.
And it definitely worked, because nobody can deny that.
Mm-hmm.
Even the people who are averse to it or say it's this or it's that, well, your great great grandparents probably converted through that means.
100%.
You can't deny that. That's not denied. Statistics are clearly out there. History doesn't lie.
So I mean, my point that I was almost trying to make was the fact that, therefore, you can't deny young people this creative space,
No,
because you know, your attachment to the faith was potentially through these people, or you were converted through these people, or your relevance to the religion, or when you turn up to the masjid is when, you know, the Qawwali is taking place or the mehfils are taking place, etc., etc. That to deny other people this, and to deny the next generation this, it might not be in the same form, but the cultural aspect is the same. The engagement, you're trying to engage them in the same way. So therefore, my point is, there shouldn't be a pushback on that.
No, not on that. No, I mean, we need to navigate the space properly.
Mhm.
Don't get me wrong. We need to navigate the space where it's not a free for all. I don't want to be kind of. It shouldn't be that made to seem that I'm saying it's just an open kind of white canvas.
Yeah.
But we have to navigate that space properly. But I'm saying that space isn't being tapped into. You know, I'll give an example. You know, take for instance when we are talking about defending Islam. So we have so many articles that this person's written this article or that article. How many people, let's be honest, besides people who are in the field, like in our field we read a lot. Naturally, every day we read, and we have to read because it's part of what we do. But people go out there, stand in the city centre, and say and survey how many people have read an article in the last month. People don't read articles, generally speaking, but they watch a 30-second video, or they watch a video that's a minute long. We haven't kind of employed that medium or used it well enough at all. I mean, you know, religious person standing in front of a camera, that doesn't do it. Doesn't cut the mustard. It doesn't work. Real creatives out there I've met. I worked in this field in video and graphics and this field for most of my life, in coding. So I know how it works. I know how it influences people. I know how it affects people. And I know what good quality is in that field. Mm-hmm. And we really haven't tapped into it. If you look at our production quality for anything, it's quite poor. And probably because of the funding is not available. But also because we lack creative minds. And creative minds are not attracted to our organisations anyway. Yeah. They don't really find the space there because, you know, think about it. If you think of a religious organisation, you wouldn't walk in and there's a table there and there are 5-6, you know, guys there sitting there in hoods on with caps, and you know they look like, you know, nerds/skateboarders. You don't expect that. You know, you'd walk into a madrasa and expect a load of, you know, there's an image of what you have, because those creatives are not finding that space there. You don't really, they're not attracted to that. So we have to ask ourselves questions: why are people not being attracted to the religion, and why are we kind of ostracizing this group of people? Why don't they feel they can come? You know, I remember a person said to me a long time ago, he said, you know, I don't go to a masjid because I'm scared of it. I'm scared of going to the masjid. Why is he scared? There may be some childhood trauma there, but when we go to masjids, or even madrasas, or even, I remember people have brought, you know, their nephews, nieces, sons, friends to the class, and they've come and said, oh, I really didn't expect this. I expected to turn up. You know, I mean, they had something in mind, and they'll come and talk to me after, and we'll build a relationship up. But they expect something. Ask yourself why they expect that, because there's definitely a narrative that's out there. We need to change that narrative. We need to be... creativity is kind of the magic word now, I think. You know, things over coffee, discussions. Scholars need access to that market of people.
Yeah.
Because they could, remember I talked about spiritual crisis.
Yeah.
Don't forget that people, even with this the kind of this modernity, this period of modernity that we're living in, and liquid modernity, people are spiritually bankrupt at the moment.
Yeah.
The levels of depression are at their highest, anxiety at its highest, levels of bipolar at its highest. Now, why is that? And that shows there's a spiritual absence of spirituality.
Yeah.
So people really want it. Where do they invest money? Into ruqya, into these kind of. That's what answer we have currently.
Yeah.
But we don't have those social circles, or the scholars or the religious people should be much more creative in the way that they tackle the problem and what audience we're kind of attracting or talking to. I remember when we set in our youth group, I said to them at the beginning, when people hear about a youth group, parents are like, "Oh, let's send my kids there because it's going to be a good environment, a religious environment." Obviously, we didn't create it in that way. We wanted a safe environment where kids could express themselves. If you come to and see our kids, you'll see they're girls. They're majority of them that don't wear headscarf. That's not what they're there for. Right? They're there for us to build a good relationship with religion for them. But if you're selling ice cubes to Eskimos, you're just reproducing another madrasa with a fancier name, maybe with a slightly fancier dress. It's not going to solve the problem. You need to actually be bold, accept the circumstances. I remember a long time ago, a guy said to me, he criticized some of the kind of steps we were taking. He said, "You got to do it like this." That same person ends up bringing his daughter saying, "Look, nothing's working." So now we become the creative space now, because that will work, because that's different. And that's exactly what I was trying to tell him to begin with, that we need to build a space for what's required, not what you think is required. See, ulama often, they do things because they think it's the right thing. To them, it's surveyed the problem.
Yeah.
It's may not be the right thing to do, but they think it's the right thing to do. So let's just do another fiqh class. There are plenty of fiqh classes out there. That's not what we're lacking. We're lacking other things. So I think that's kind of important.
And that is, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. What do you think? I think the creative space and also the link between, like I said, is the idea of the ulama not being relevant, the idea of introducing people to God, the idea of creating a good Muslim culture, does come back to the arts and the culture and creativity, because what one point that you mentioned was the fact that don't get me wrong, that we need sometimes these creative people do need to be reined in a little bit and told, listen, this is permissible, that's permissible. And I think that therefore with the ulama working hand in hand with them and offering those spaces to them, it then becomes you don't have an issue with it.
See, one thing that I definitely will say that I've seen it sometimes with the ulama, but definitely preachers. See, as soon as we go out there and take everybody on, and start discussing every social event, what that ends up doing is that those people in that creative space that are already there, it isolates them. So, as an example, imagine there was a particular social event that took place where a particular influencer or a Muslim that was famous did something. Now, how can we use that particular person to our advantage, or how can we, maybe even if the person's done something wrong, let's say, what's the best approach to take? The best approach isn't going out there and speaking about it. It's by building a relationship with that person. It's very, very important. But what scholars do is they kind of blacklist themselves. They'll go out there and speak about it, and that person will never come near you. You'll never have any interaction with that person. And they assume that I'm out there exposing the batil, or we need to speak about this and correct this. We need to correct this misguidance. But let's be honest, that's not how it's done. You see, that's not the best, the most pragmatic approach. You're just isolating these people. I talked to a lot of influencers, and it's very interesting that the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, many people came to him, but he didn't Often he didn't even say anything to them, even though they may have been doing wrong. He didn't talk about that particular thing. He was kind of general about it. And then once they spent time with him, that sohbah with him, they began to change and change and change. And that's a very kind of, it's an amazing way of dealing with the issue, that sohbah or companionship and building a relationship with somebody is much more powerful than saying something, because you don't know, you're saying something, but how are they receiving it? You don't know what space they're in that particular time, what place they're in their lives. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know why they're doing what they're doing. When the whole discussion about the shadow self, and when John Locke and Carl Jung and Freud talked about this idea of what drives us to do things that are bad, that don't benefit us. Is it the shadow self? What is it? Now, people just may be in a bad place, but what's the best way of bringing them back, or advising them, or benefiting them? And wouldn't it be better to build relationships with those people, considering they're quite powerful in that medium anyway, and using them in a good way, and that's very dangerous, that precedent, and it's been set by many, that when something happens we need to go after people, we need to comment about people. That's not the way of the ulama. Historically, this idea of something being mu'ayyan, like specific to a person, the ulama never really talked about that. And those who did were criticized by other scholars. Sometimes there's a point to it. It's very rare, but sometimes it's such an overwhelming danger that somebody needs to mention it. But that's not very. And you talked about earlier that when all these scholars are receiving all these issues about, let's say, these influences, whatever it may be, but many of the scholars are thinking to themselves, look, it's not even relevant. We're dealing with these other issues over here. Is that really relevant? People have come to me and said, why don't you talk about X, Y, or Z? And I'm like, I personally don't believe it's relevant. I don't think that we need to be talking about that right now. I think we need to. You can criticize me for it, but that's your opinion is as good as mine then, because it's subjective, and you can say mine is subjective, but that's how I feel I'm going to follow it through. So scholars are overwhelmed to that end of what they should talk about, and certain scholars are doing excellent work. Let's not forget that, but we need much, much more of it, and we probably need people to fund. The public have a lot of money. The Muslim community in Birmingham anyway, it's pretty well loaded, so they need to fund that and move away from this kind of. We do need to move away from, or move to, not away, move to funding more creative projects. And people realize that when they have kids. My son now is 13. I remember 13 years ago teaching, and my perception of what was needed then is completely different to what's needed now. He's coming home and asking me about rappers, and can I listen to this, and can I watch this, and why can't I do this, and why can't I do that. He's going through all these emotions and all these things. So the whole idea of parenting is changing for me. And I'm accepting it now, that what advice I would have given 10 years ago probably isn't the same advice now. So that's kind of very, very important. Prevalent culture is very, very important. Prevailing culture, sorry.
Alhamdulillah. So I hope we've answered this question pretty fully, and I wouldn't say answer it, but I mean we've had a really good conversation about it, and kind of fleshed it out, and what are the potential solutions to it moving forward as well. And I'll leave a link to Shaykh Sjaad's sacred texts. Have a look at it. His Arabic Accelerated course is probably one of the best Arabic courses you can do if you're interested in that. New Roots Open Circle.
nwrts.co.uk.
So you can get information on that. You've got plans of pushing it further than the Midlands?
Well, the New Roots now is, although Open Circles, it's kind of most famous project.
Okay.
We have other projects in the pipeline as well. That Open Circle is just for young people. So it's a Open Circle now, where we're moving to a model where we'll be training. In fact, we're training other organisations to do the same thing.
Okay.
And the first one was to be trained this weekend, but it's cancelled now because of the coronavirus outbreak, the pandemic, and so that's been postponed. But that will be launching the London. So although Open Circle is distinct, other organisations are going to name it. I think it's called Next Gen. In Barking, it's starting.
Okay.
So that group of people in the Hive, it's called organisation. They're starting there in Medina Masjid in London. They're going to be starting their own, taking a whole model. So we will train the staff there to set it up. in London. Hopefully, to be honest, as many places as we can get it. I've got a whole team that runs it. My role is the most insignificant, to be honest with you, but that team will be, and we've got a lot of other projects. I've got a project, inshallah, that's coming up on addiction to pornography, on counselling and therapy for people who have issues with that. So that's a big project that's coming 2020 this year. So we've got projects like that. So New Roots deals only with those community projects.
Okay. So yeah, so I'll leave a link in the description for all of those. Please check them out. Shaykh Sjaad's doing phenomenal work, and and to be honest with you, he really is setting the standard when it comes to all these issues. So, and tackling these issues as well. So please check them out. Keep up to date with what's happening with sacred texts as well, and the New Roots project. And you never know, you might have a youth group being set up, which is based upon this model, inshallah. So
thank you very much.
And,
Shukran, thank you for having me.